This episode is brought to you by Promensal.
My big advice for, if you're really starting to question your job and whether you want to do it anymore, and if you are going through menopause, I say don't make any big life decisions while you're in the throes of symptoms. If there's any way you can just press pause for a little bit, maybe take a little bit of long service if you need to, that's if you're really struggling. See if you can get some good treatment and, think through things a bit.
Welcome to Thriving in Menopause, brought to you by Prevention Magazine. I'm Andrea Duval, editor of Prevention, and this episode is all about confidence. It's a real issue that menopause can change how we're seen by our workmates and our bosses and undermine our confidence. And it's something that today's guest's been researching and has some fascinating findings on. Thea O'Connor is a health and workplace coach, and she now runs workshops called The Change, Women, Work and Menopause, to offer women tools and tips to give them confidence.
Thea, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm interested to discover how you realised that menopause was a really important, major issue really for women in the workplace.
Well, it started off with my own experience. When I was at the age of 52, I started to experience some changes that I actually didn't realise were menopause because they weren't so much physical, but they were more in relation to my brain. So I experienced brain fog and challenges with my short-term memory and also just feeling a lot less motivated about work, than I normally do. And I'd never experienced any of these, before in my life. And I started to freak out a bit about my employability. I'm self-employed and I need a clear, sharp brain. But as I was freaking out, I kind of caught myself and went, hang on, how are all those other 50-year-old women out there in the workplace going who are holding down much more demanding jobs than me? How are they going? And then I realised I had not heard a thing, not a whisper, not from my 3 older sisters, not from my mum, not from my wise female business mentors. And then I got a bit suspicious. So I conducted, it's now 50 confidential interviews with Australian working women about their experience. And of course, the symptoms are really diverse, but the standout theme from those interviews was that of silence and a sense of secrecy. Women just felt like they could not speak up about this. So it was obviously this taboo topic that I had stumbled across. And then I went poking around a little bit more, and there'd been some research by Monash Uni that also found very similar things. And there's been a government report written on it in the UK as well about women and work. And found that there were similar themes around not being able to speak up about it, despite the fact that, at least over 50% of women will say, the symptoms do impact on my work. They make it more challenging.
So I'm interested, what was, say, the two most common terms women use to describe how they felt?
Mm-hmm. There were two standouts, and those words were, it was an isolating experience and embarrassing. So they found it incredibly isolating because they felt they couldn't talk about it. And what was interesting was that it wasn't just at work that women often weren't talking about it, but they realised this isn't something that they spoke about even with their friends that much, or at least not in the same way that women share, when we go through pregnancy or breastfeeding. There's intense female-to-female support there, isn't there? And information sharing, and you're sharing all your latest hot tips. Get to midlife and those networks just don't seem to be there anymore. And I'm not sure if it's because, number one, women don't know that what menopause involves and no one gives them the talk, but also it's a really busy life stage and you haven't got as much time to sit down and connect with your female friends as you might have in the past. And then, it's embarrassing. If you're having a hot flush, particularly if you're at a very senior level in the organisation and you're sweating and your glasses are fogging up, or if you experience a heavy, unpredictable bleed and it can stain on the chair, which does happen, that those things can be embarrassing.
Yeah, so it's, I suppose, a combination of those embarrassing moments, but also because menopause and being postmenopausal defines a different kind of woman, I guess there's some kind of embarrassment or stigma about, they're not going to see me as Thea anymore. It's going to be, middle-aged Thea, and there's a whole lot of baggage, isn't there, that comes with that. So I'm wondering what kind of discrimination you think women fear by owning up to menopause. Is it being seen as some sort of emotional mess, or do you think they're fearful that it might threaten their job security in some way?
I think the baseline fear is that, they will be seen as not fit for work. And I think women often don't want to talk about it because they're well aware that gendered ageism is alive and well already in workplaces, and that somehow menopause is going to kind of spark all of that or bring all of that to the fore, because menopause is a clear marker that, yes, you're in a female body, and secondly, that you're getting older. So some of the women would describe there being an unconscious bias that menopause signals you're getting past it, you're not at your career peak anymore. Now, I think what we women have to take responsibility for is sometimes absolutely that discrimination is there in the workplace. But when we start to self-discriminate, when we internalise those beliefs and start doubting ourselves, then, that's the inner work that we have to do as well. Because the more that we can show up at work, really solid in our sense of self-worth and the value that we bring to workplaces, and that menopause is just a natural stage of life, just be simple, clear, matter of fact about it, I think that might actually help shift perceptions of menopause, the way we carry ourselves when we're going through it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Thea. How do we go about that? I'm really interested to tap into what you are teaching women about learning to glide through some of these tricky situations with more confidence.
Yeah, I don't know if we glide, though that would be very nice. I'm going to hang on to that, Andrea. I think when women have been in the real throes of menopause, when they do have challenging symptoms, and it's really important to point out that not all women do, and some women can step into this life stage, without too much trouble. But for those who do find it really challenging, they may not be able to jump to thinking, oh, yes, this is a passage into me being a wise elder, because that's not what they're feeling. But just practicing acceptance can actually reduce the amount of distress that they're feeling. So I'm thinking of some women who had really bad hot flushes, and their first reaction is to kind of really reject it and just not want it to be there and to be really angry about it. And that only makes things worse for ourselves. Increased stress levels will make the symptoms worse. So if you can just kind of breathe into it, acceptance. Yes, this too shall pass. Every other woman has gone through menopause. I can be with this. That in and of itself can stop a lot of the battle. So that's one suggestion. The other one is, menopause is a great opportunity to stop and reevaluate, how have I been treating my body up until now? And many women know that their well-being has been at the bottom of their priority list. They're really good at caring for others. I think menopause, that becomes non-negotiable. You absolutely have to prioritise your own self-care. And I'd also suggest looking at, what stuff is there in your life that you haven't processed or dealt with, and get stuck in there. What kind of baggage is there, and book into a therapist. Do what you need to do to process that, because I'm really convinced that some of the emotional symptoms that women can experience, either, crying a lot more easily or the outbursts of anger, I'm sure that's about women having put up with stuff for way too long, and now it's all just coming to the fore.
It's interesting because we know that menopause can aggravate all kinds of anxiety, and particularly if you're worried about your work performance, because as you say, your short-term memory is now shot, it becomes cyclical. Worrying about it isn't going to make the short-term memory worse.
So I guess when women are really struggling with the symptoms and they're worried that it is affecting their performance, I just really encouraging them to really trust that it is all still there, all their experience and their talent, it is all still there, but we might just need to find ways to work a little bit differently. But building a really solid foundation of self-worth is so important. You have to really know your value. And okay, let's say your brain isn't quite as fast as normal. What else is it that you bring to the workplace? And I'm sure you've got a stack of qualities that you carry, and that benefits other employees, whether it's patience, wisdom, humour, discernment, kindness, whatever.
Thanks, Thea. We'll be right back after this short message.
Perimenopause can actually start in your 40s. Declining estrogen production during perimenopause brings on changes to menstrual cycles, and often the onset of hot flushes, night sweats, mood swings, and sexual problems. Promensal Peri is specifically designed for perimenopausal women and can help relieve these common menopausal symptoms. Promensal Peri is available at leading pharmacies across Australia and offers a cost-effective treatment at under $1 a day. When things start to change, try Promensal Peri. Always read the label and follow the directions for use.
Okay, we're back.
So are you saying that, putting pen to paper and actually saying, what makes me a good employee is a really nice place to start to appreciate, to stand outside yourself a bit and look at those qualities?
Yeah, by all means. And when you're writing down what makes me a great employee, don't just write down what you did, then ask you, but how did I do that? How did I go about that? What was the particular quality that I brought? Because I imagine, that's part of your essence, which is unchangeable. So building that foundation of self-worth that isn't so much dependent on, what you do, but who you are is really important. And also just be open to finding different ways of working. So, for example, when I was really struggling to write my articles because it just wasn't, happening there, I just had to learn to say, Thea, stop freaking out, sit down in front of the computer, start typing, and invariably something would come. So I had to rely not so much on motivation and energy, but a sense of purpose. I've got a job to do here, and this is my job to do because I can bring to it something that others can't. But then on a really practical level, I had to break my day up a lot more. So I would take a lot more short energy breaks, which would mean, yes, I might start work earlier and I might finish later, but I've had a lot of I call them energy breaks, recovery breaks throughout the day, and that's really good for your brain. And I had to up my exercise as well. Yeah.
Yes. Exercise is so good for oxygenating our brains. But for those of us who aren't able to set our own time frame around our work, what sort of things are you suggesting? Is it even just get up and make a cup of tea?
Absolutely, yes. And the great thing about recovery breaks is they do not have to be long. We're literally talking anywhere from 1 minute. I was interviewing a woman the other day who was doing a whole PhD on cognition and breaks, and she found that even a 1 minute intentional break, so you had to fully disengage, but if you stood up, went away from the screen just for 1 minute, that actually improved their speed and accuracy on return. So we've really got to remember the power of short breaks, anywhere between 1 and 10 minutes. The ideal break is fully disengaged. That can just be turning away from your computer. If it has a social element, that can be good if you're in the mood. But if you can incorporate a little bit of movement, that is just like fertilizer for your brain. And even 2 to 3 minutes of stepping every hour, that has been proven to increase your energy levels at the end of the day.
Wow.
So all of these things that we've been hearing about for a long time, short health breaks throughout the day that none of us actually do, now's the time to actually do them because you need them.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, that's a really good way to deal with brain fog.
Let's talk about having hot flushes in public. I remember a while ago a well-known newsreader describing how during the evening news bulletin she could feel this hot flush come on, and she was convinced that every viewer at home could see her face colouring red. This sort of thing can be so distracting and it stops you from concentrating on what you're doing. It's embarrassing. What sort of tips can you suggest when you're in this situation?
So I think the first thing is just not to live in fear of that moment when you're going to have a hot flush. Anticipate, yes, this is going to happen, and what am I going to do? So have a plan. So when you first feel the physical symptoms, what are you going to say to yourself? So normally we might go, oh no, everyone's going to look at me. How embarrassing. You need to come up with a different self-talk. Otherwise, that self-talk is just going to make your stress even worse. And they've actually done studies on applying mindfulness to hot flushes. And that's about training yourself to say things more like, okay, here's a hot flush, one hot flush at a time. I can cope with this. I don't even know if anyone else is going to notice, rather than doing all the awfulising talk. So plan, what are you going to say to yourself that you believe? Don't make a fake affirmation that you don't believe in, but that just takes it more neutrally. And then you need to probably prepare. What are you going to say if you feel you need a break? So if you are standing up in front of other people, I've asked different women this, what did you end up saying? And some of them just say, look, just having a hot flush at the moment, it's perfectly normal. Let's just have a standing break and I'm going to get a glass of water. So some women just choose to name it up front and in a very matter-of-fact, unapologetic manner. Because the more women that do that, the more we will see this is completely normal and we don't have to freak out. So my main advice there is have a plan. I'm thinking of another woman who did a bit of conference speaking, and so sometimes she might, get a hot flush on stage, and she had an assistant, and she would make this little signal with her hand, and so her assistant knew to crank the air conditioning up, open up the windows. So my main advice is have a plan, work out your self-talk, and know that this is absolutely normal, and the more that we let the world know that, the better place it's going to be for everyone.
Yeah. So let's look at some of the other scenarios. And we know that particularly in perimenopause, women start to encounter some wild mood swings. And in the workplace, it's bad enough at home when it's your partner. But in the workplace, that's a particularly dangerous thing to happen. And so what sorts of things can women do to regain that lovely sense of grace and composure that we all aspire to?
Yeah, we're not used to strong emotions in the workplace, are we? So I guess the first thing is, if they are indeed wild mood swings, book in with your doctor. You don't have to necessarily live through that. Some people are into HRT or MHT as they call it now, other people aren't. But there are a lot of approaches that you could try. So that would be my very first suggestion. And then again, I would book in and see a psychologist, and just to see, is there anything actually underneath here that I do need to address? We tend to blame everything that happens in menopause on our hormones. And sure, they absolutely do play a role, but also what's happening in our life as well, or the backlog of unaddressed issues are often playing a role too. But the positive thing that women say is that as they get older and go through this transition, they're far less tolerant of bad behaviour. They're less willing to put up with stuff, and they're far more forthright in speaking out and speaking the truth, a lot less people-pleasing. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. We just have to harness our strong emotions to make sure we deliver that well.
Yes.
That's what we can take responsibility for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nicely put.
So you're right that, midlife is a really full-on time. I've never had more responsibilities. I've got I'm 55, but I've got a 13-year-old daughter, as I'm sure many older women out there do. Got older parents, running my own business, and I kind of feel like I'm really hitting my stride that way. So life has never been more full. So just one thing to be aware of is when stuff doesn't happen in midlife, it could be menopause or it could just be everything else that's going on. So let's not blame everything on menopause. We need to just be really honest with ourselves there. And also we need to look at, is everything that we're doing at the moment what we really need to be doing, or are we just trying to prove ourselves in what is still very much, a man's world? And in the workplace, women are just working their butts off to prove that they're as good as men. Yeah. But, do we need to be doing all that we're doing? So a bit of a stock take is a really good idea. But my big advice for if you're really starting to question your job and whether you want to do it anymore, and if you are going through menopause, I say don't make any big life decisions while you're in the throes of symptoms. If there's any way you can just press pause for a little bit, maybe take a little bit of long service if you need to. That's if you're really struggling. See if you can get some good treatment and, think through things a bit. I think there's scope to press pause on big decisions. Yeah.
Okay. You talk a lot about mindfulness, and it's one of those words we hear bandied around a bit these days. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in essence, mindfulness, which you can either do in a formal meditation practice or in everyday life, it's simply bringing non-judgmental awareness to the present moment. So, and you can apply that to your body. So as I mentioned before, when you feel a physical sensation in your body, rather than say, oh my God, here comes a hot flush, you could just say, I can feel heat rising around my neck. So it's purely objective language. And what that does is it really takes the sting out of things. And there have been a lot of studies that show how amazing mindfulness is for reducing the whole stress response. Our heart rate slows down, our breathing slows down, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So it's applying non-judgmental awareness to the present moment or to our bodily symptoms. So you might just look at what is your self-talk and how can you apply more objective language to that because it does help our emotional response, and it helps us be in the present moment rather than worrying about what you said in that meeting and whether you said dumb in the past or awfulising about the future.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think it was interesting when you talk about the whole mindfulness thing too. When it comes to memory, and us, one of my lovely colleagues upstairs has her computer screen covered in Post-it notes. That's her way now, as she's going through menopause, of catching all of those moments that she's fearful that she's going to forget. It works for her.
Yes.
Any similar tips?
I know some women say that often people will come up to them in the workplace and ask them something, and in the past they would have just bang had the answer like that. They don't have that anymore. So they learn to say things like, oh, look, busy at the moment, just leave that with me and I'll get back to you.
Nice.
Because invariably we do remember, but sometimes it's an hour later, go, oh, yes, that's who it was, or that's what it was. So just learn these little phrases to give yourself a little bit of time and space. And, Google Calendar, can't go past Google Calendar.
Yes.
But also don't give up on your memory. Set yourself a little memory challenge every day because it's still a muscle that we can exercise. So my little one is I try to visualise my Google Calendar day for the next day because I realised I was becoming over-reliant on it, and I just see what I can remember before I click there, to open up. So see if you can give yourself a memory test. Keep exercising it.
That's nice.
If you're in a meeting, you can look super professional to say, look, this is a really important conversation. I'm just going to make a few notes here, to make sure I capture it. And at the end, you feed it back to them and, they feel like they've been heard so beautifully and you gave yourself space to actually write it down.
Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Now, another thing you speak about is changing the self-talk in our heads, and this comes back to a point we were saying earlier about how we are such harsh critics of ourselves. And honestly, as that lovely meme said, would you speak to anyone you love the way you speak to yourself in your head?
Yes.
But changing the self-talk isn't necessarily the easiest in the world. So what sort of shifts do you encourage women to make? How can we do that?
I think the first thing is just to actually become aware of, what am I saying to myself? And sometimes we're not even that conscious of it. We're only conscious of the bad feeling after the thought. I'm thinking of one woman, for example, who had really bad problems with brain fog, and she ended up saying to herself, oh, I'm good for nothing. And that became what she was saying to herself. And this was a woman who you wouldn't have thought had a problem with self-esteem. So number one, keep a little log. And every time during your working day where you feel your mood drop, go back and say, what did I just say to myself? So first of all, do an audit of your inner critic. And then you can look at it objectively and then you can go, okay, how is that impacting me? But just to give you an idea of different frames that you might give yourself, so acceptance is one, that's kind of like the baseline one. But you can also just acknowledge, I'm going through massive change at the moment. Of course, I'm feeling a bit up or down, or of course, I'm not my normal self. You can also look at menopause as it is an opportunity to stop and take stock. So say, yep, things are really bumpy at the moment, but I'm going to use this. I'm going to milk it, to the best of my ability to make all the changes that I've needed to change. Or even if you just think of menopause as reverse puberty, which effectively it is. So we know that puberty doesn't always look that great, does it? You get pimples and body odour and you get moody and, you can be a bit erratic. Well, the same kind of things can happen during menopause. We don't stigmatise people for going through puberty, so let's not do the same to ourselves when we're going through reverse puberty.
Thanks, Thea. We'll be right back after this short message. Okay, we're back.
Well, Thea, you've obviously put a lot of this advice into practice in your own life. How do you feel now?
Yeah, so I feel like an older version and a deeper version of myself. So yes, my physical body is aging, absolutely. On the inside, I'm loving now how it feels. So I'm about probably 3 or 4 years in. I'm just about out the other end. And I love the sense of there's an inner steadiness and a sense of kind of growing authority that I'm loving. And I don't get as stressed about work as much anymore. The little things don't get me, as bothered. So I feel solid and steady and in my authority, Andrea. That's where I'm going.
That's something to look forward to, isn't it?
It's something to look forward to, that's right.
All right. So, in closing, if there was one piece of advice you wish you could go back in time and have told your perimenopausal self, what would it be?
Yeah, it was a bit of a tricky question, this one. But I think what I would do would be to seek out some wise, older female mentors earlier. Because when I encountered menopause, I was looking around going, where do I turn? Who do I talk to? And so I would be, even if you haven't encountered menopause yet, look around you and pick out who are the women who you want to go and chat to when this starts to happen to you. So build your circle of elders so that you can tap into them when you need to. Because there's nothing like talking to someone who's been there, done that.
Yeah. Nice. Oh, Thea, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Andrea.
But that's all for now, and thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast. And also pick up a copy of Prevention magazine, where you'll find more great advice about thriving at midlife. I'm Andrea Duval, editor of Prevention, and thanks to our podcast editor today, Josh Lundberg. See you next time.